And good morning. How's everybody doing today? Nice, nice. Yeah, that's the really the part I would like about hunting. Walking through the forest um, is cool. I don't know about getting up at 5 in the morning. I don't know about sitting in a tree or getting up at 4 in the morning or sitting in a tree when it's cold. But I definitely like being out in the woods, John. How's everybody else doing? Yeah, it is calming, right? How's everybody doing? How many people do we have on the broadcast right now? Bed looks like 3 or 4. Fantastic. Good deal. Good to see you, Monty. How are you doing? How are you doing? Thanks for coming today. All right, we are. Uh-oh. Okay, yeah, I got you. All right, just want to make sure. All right, everybody sees this, the live chat. Hold on, I'm trying to get it. It is kind of nice and relaxing, very meditative. Where do you hunt, John? It's kind of hard to find land to hunt on, really. That's the difficult problem. My wife's grandfather owned a hunt club out in towards Rocky, not towards Troy and Bisco. They had about 700 or 800 acres. Oh, cool. Game lands. Fantastic. Good deal. All right. So let's go ahead and get started today. Remember, we're talking about chapter 12, socio emotional development in adolescence. So remember, we're in that one, two, three, four, fifth stage of life. Now, one of the things I want you to do to know throughout this semester is I want you to learn sort of this organizational scheme. This is why I keep putting it up every day when we start lectures. I want you to know the periods of development, and I want you to know the three broad areas of development. In fact, next week I might even have a question about these periods of development. Why were chapters 11 and 12 reversed? What exactly do you mean? What exactly do you mean? 11 and 12 reversed. I'm not exactly sure. I'm sure I don't know what you're talking about, but I'm sure it was a mistake on my part. So, oh, good morning, Nicole. Good to see you. Yeah, I'm going to wait for you to ask that question and then I'll respond to it. But in the meantime, chapter 11 was physiological development. 12 reverse. Chapters 11 and 12 reverse. In our chapter 11, we learned adolescence. In 12, we learned middle, late childhood. All right. I'm not sure. That's interesting. I'm not sure. But this is how I'll look at that. In your book, in our chapter 11, I've got the textbook right here. Huh. I'm looking at it right here. Chapter 11, physical and cognitive development in adolescence is chapter 11. Physical and cognitive development in adolescence. And chapter 12, the PowerPoints. Oh, okay. Well, I'm sure it was a screw up on my chart. Is it something I need to go and fix right now, John, after class? I'll go and take a look at it after class, okay? Let's go ahead and get started, shall we? Now, do you remember last week I asked you the question about how the self develops? And if you think about it from from a Piagetian perspective, we go from that our first thinking about self is that we have a temperament, but we don't have a personality. We don't even have self awareness. Then in early childhood, we think about ourselves in these concrete, unrealistic terms that don't relate to our relationships with other people. Then I suggested to you that in middle childhood, we develop a sense of self which is more grounded in reality, more social in nature, and we begin to talk about our feelings and our emotions as part of ourselves. There's actually going to be one more evolution. If you think about it, now all of us, when we think about ourselves, we have a narrative identity. So not only do I know that Chris is a really fast runner, he's kind of short, he's smart, he's funny. Some people like me, a lot of people don't like me, etc., etc. I can also talk to you about Chris, the academic from Alabama, and I can tell you a story about myself. So if you think about it, one form of your identity, and we talked a lot about identity in webinar last night. One important thing when we grow up is we develop this sense of identity, and we have a story of ourself. So that's going to be kind of like the final piece of the self that comes when you get into your teenage identity formation years. Not only do I have skills and emotions, not only do I integrate my sense of self with those around me and compare myself with those around me, but I now have a story. And that's really what an identity is. Now, your self portrait's composed of many pieces, and this is why being a teenager is so tough, because you're putting together this narrative identity. Your sense of identity, rather than a sense of self, your sense of identity is going to include this narrative, and it's going to try to create a cohesive picture of who you are. So when you get into the teenage years, it's not enough to really just think of your qualities, but we're now creating a narrative of who we are, a story, a profile, if you will. And that includes a lot of times we talk about our vocation. So that's sort of the big thing that they focus on in high school is what's your career going to be? What's your career going to be? What are you aiming for? Why do you want to go to school? That's one piece of your identity. But your identity also involves your political and religious beliefs, right? You're going to have your first, second, third, fourth boyfriend or girlfriend, and you're going to learn about what kind of a relationship partner you are. You're going to either begin to achieve things and win awards or not. And you're going to have to describe how you are in terms of being an achieved person. You're going to have to come up with an intellectual identity. You're going to have to figure out where your sexual identity lies. What do you like to demonstrate about your sexuality? What do you prefer in your sexual activity? How do you put these together? Um, so, in a sense, you're going to have to think about yourself as a sexual being as well. Uh, Most of us don't have to. I was brought up in the South, I grew up in the South, I'm from the South, so maybe I don't have to think so much about my cultural or ethnic identity. But if you've ever had to move from one place to another, you've had to think about who you are as one culture or another. And so all of these pieces of yourself all have to be cobbled together into a narrative element. And this all happens between 13 and 20 as you create your sense of identity. This is why high school is so stressful, right? You are moving from being Mr. and Mrs. Roddenberry's kid. That's who I was when I was 11. I was Bob Roddenberry's son at 11. By the time I was 18, it was necessary for me to be Chris Roddenberry, the individual. I had to create my own sense of identity. That's what each and every one of us has to do during the teenage years. And that's a very scary process, right? But here's the deal, that is not the end of your identity development. Your entire life is going to be spent maintaining or readjusting this sense of of identity, right? And in fact, you may have to reinvent yourself several times. In a sense, it down here it talks about this MAMA. We typically think of that period when we're choosing our identity as moratorium. In fact, Piaget, I mean not Piaget, but Erik Erikson and James Marcia called teenage years the moratorium period. And when you achieve your identity, we call that the achievement. And so you can think of the teenage years as this moratorium period, and then we achieve an identity. Well, according to these guys, you're always reinventing yourself. Think about how often you have to just stop and start completely over. Maybe you lose a job or a career. Boom, you have to readjust your identity again. So we go back into moratorium until we get another career. If you decide to get married or have a child or move to another land or country, you may have to readjust or reachieve a sense of identity. So think about identity as this lifelong struggle that you have trying to figure out what kind of person you are, what kind of story you have, and how to present that to the world. That's what identity is. Now, one of the weird things you're going to notice as an sort of an aside is that you're going to see there schizophrenia and other personality disorders are going to begin to manifest themselves typically in the teenage years. One of the things that clinical psychologists know is when disorders tend to begin, when's the most likely time to have them. And what you're going to see is that we do have some identity related disorders that tend to appear in the late teens. Okay. I didn't move the circle, John. I'm sorry. I didn't move the circle. I screwed that up. I now see what the problem is. John was noticing the details. I will fix that. Right. It's a typo. I'm king of the typo. Okay. I see in the chat bar we're talking about it. Thank you all for sorting it out. We're getting to the root of Dr. Roddenberry's problem. It's embarrassing, but I'm seeing my I'm seeing my typographic mistake play out here in the chat bar, and it's simultaneously funny and embarrassing. Okay, now so this period of developing an identity is a different period. You know, one of the things that I have noticed that I didn't put on here was I didn't actually talk about Erik Erikson's stage of let's see, that would be the fifth stage of personality development. Okay, so we probably should talk about identity. What is it? Excuse me. Oh my goodness, I can't believe I forgot the term. Identity versus identity. Erikson stages. Oh my God. Identity versus, goodness me, why can't I remember that? I'm starting to flip out here. Role confusion versus role confusion. So this is when we try to pick an identity. Now, here's the deal with Erik Erikson. He suggested that there are extremes. Remember, according to Erik Erikson, in these each of these crises, we have to learn how to resolve this crisis without either going to one extreme or the other. Now, what you're going to notice is some people have trouble choosing an identity. All right, they have what you might call a diffused identity, or what Erikson called role confusion. Some people just have trouble moving into the adult world and choosing an identity. You'll see these people because sometimes they don't role confusion. They don't. They are afraid to grow up. They're sort of stuck in this Peter Pan lifestyle where they're afraid to grow up and join uh, the world. So you can think about these people who have confusion about how they fit in with the adult world. People who maybe never go to college, people are not, maybe these people don't go to college or don't get a career, and they decide not to work. Maybe those I last night I talked about the 40-year-old that lives on mom and dad's couch playing video games all day long that refuses to grow up. Yeah, sometimes people feel like they don't fit in and they may choose a gang life instead of a real adult life. These are people. Is it a timeline that makes moratorium a crisis versus diffusion? No, here's the deal. Every time we go into moratorium, something has caused us to reevaluate who we are and what our story is. So, that moratorium period that we experience in the teenage years is a typical. So, according to Eric Erickson, these challenges occur at typical times. It's typical to have to choose an identity as you move out of childhood. You have to choose an identity. However, any major life event that causes you to change your major activity, your location, uh, will cause you to have to reevaluate your sense of self. Environmental change. If I moved to China, I would have to confront some identity issues. Who am I as an American living in China? If my wife was to divorce me right now, I would have to redefine myself as Chris, the divorced man, right? If I was to quit my job right now and decide to be a utility worker like my son, I would have to redefine myself. Um, Diffusion and moratorium, right? Okay. Diffusion is unwillingness to select. Uh, let's see, were you talking a diffusion? I haven't thought about it yet. Right, right. They're different, and I'm going to get to that in just a minute. So we have to go through sort of this identity process, and let's see, where was I going with this? And so, oh yeah, so P. Erickson, we have identity versus role confusion. Now, you can mess that up the other way too. Some people get so focused on an idea of what they're going to be professionally that they throw everything else to the wayside. You need to find love, and somehow, not it doesn't have to be romantic love, but you have to find an adult connection separate from your parents. You cannot survive if you don't have adult connections, a sense of family, a sense of love. Most people do it by pair bonding with another couple romantically, but you can do it with a group of friends or whatnot. But we all have to do that. But some people get so focused on their career that they are unwilling to even consider that stuff. These people are fanatics about their job. Some people grow up and you'll see them on Facebook. They've become either religious or they've become super duper progressive and liberal, or they become super MAGA-y, and suddenly they know how the world should work and what you should believe and what you should think and what you should do. And they're on the left and the right too. But people who are so focused on their identity that they think that's the only thing there is and that people should be like them are fanatics. And they've failed the identity task too. According to Erickson, you have to have the ability to pick an identity, but be willing to mold that identity as you grow up and to allow people the space to have their own sense of identity. And if you do, you develop this quality he called fidelity. Remember, we talked about these good personality qualities he called virtues. We talked about hope. We talked about purpose, will, competency. Well, in this stage, he called it fidelity. And fidelity means, in this context, means buying into the world, not being a cynic, being the kind of person that says, yes, I play a role in this world and I buy into this world. If you notice, and I don't mean to demean this particular point, but if you look at all of those shooters, all of those people that do unspeakable things, that grab the gun and go into schools, if you listen to those people, Most of those people are loners who have found that they don't fit into society. Yes, guns are a problem, but a bigger problem is that these people haven't developed a sense of identity. They reject the world and therefore they feel obligated to destroy it. They haven't developed a sense of uh, uh, fidelity. Now, this guy, James Marcia, expanded on this idea of moratorium, and we're getting ready to talk about this, John and Monica. He argued that there's a process by which we move through this moratorium, and you can ask people about what they're thinking about in high school and figure out where they are in identity development. Now, he argues in the prototypical healthy sense of identity development, the human being will go through a crisis, just like Erickson says. And by crisis, I mean they're thinking about their options. They're thinking about their options. What do I want to be when I grow up? Who am I politically? Who am I sexually? Who am I as a human being? That's crisis. That's basically me trying to decide who I am. He argues that in the prototypical, in the healthy identity development, we all go through this sense of crisis, like Erickson said, and then we become committed to a particular identity. We choose an identity. All right. So Chris Roddenberry is a 13-year-old in eighth grade, knew he wanted to be a professor, but didn't know what kind of professor. And so he was in crisis. He was wondering what kind of teacher he wanted to be when he grew up. And then Chris went to a science camp at Appalachian State where he took a 2-week psychology class. And suddenly he realized that he wanted to be a psychologist when he grew up. So Chris went through a process of crisis. What am I going to be? And came to a decision based on his desire. He went through a period of moratorium where he had crisis, right? And then he achieved his identity. He picked a sense of identity. I am going to be a psychologist. Now, what Marcia tries to do in this model is to explain the process by which a healthy identity achievement should go. And he talks about variations in identity that he might think are problematic. That's the thing. Um, this represents if you talk to your 8-year-old kid and say, what do you want to be when you grow up? That 8-year-old kid's going to look at you and go, I haven't even thought about it. That child, and I haven't decided, that child is in a state of identity diffusion. He hasn't even begun the identity process. All right. However, sometimes you're going to find a 17-year-old kid and you're going to say, what do you want to be when you grow up? And the kid's going to say, I haven't thought about it. Okay. And that kid's identity is diffused as well. So diffusion is sort of like the process before you have even begun to think about what kind of identity you want to have. It's what you're going to see in the youngest children, and it's what James Marcia saw in 9 and 10-year-old kids when he asked them what they wanted to be. They hadn't even begun to think about it. It's like pre-identity. Yes, 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 yes. And you are going to see it in some problematic people that decide not to grow, to even think about it, right? Right? What you're going to see, though, more likely sometimes is people are going to not have that sense of crisis either. And a lot of times it's because they think that there is no choice that they can have. So when you talk to the 15-year-old gangbanger in South Central LA, right? The Crip or the Blood or the whatever, and you say, man, why would you join a gang? And you're going to hear that kid say, Well, because there's no way I could ever succeed in today's world. There's no way I could be a lawyer or a doctor. What people like me do is we join gangs. That child has said that there's no way they can decide. They're not going to have a sense of crisis. However, they do choose a path. They are committed. They have what we would call a foreclosed identity. Moratorium, I haven't decided yet. Moratorium. Did I say that in moratorium? I haven't thought about it yet. Uh, well, I haven't thought about it yet. Identity moratorium, I haven't decided yet. Excuse me, I haven't decided yet. That's what it should say. I haven't decided yet. Identity moratorium, I haven't decided yet. Excuse me, that's a typo. Good God, man, these PowerPoints suck. These PowerPoints absolutely suck. I really got to do a better job of this. I'm going to be honest with you folks. I've got to. I don't like the ones that come from the from the textbook, and so I write my own. But then I write tons. I haven't decided. Hold on yet. Okay, I'm going to save that. Check this out. This is cool. And then I'm going to save as PowerPoint presentation, JPEG, all slides. And let's see. Okay. Ah, there we go. How about that? Okay, there we go. Jeez, I'm Mr. Typo. Okay, okay. If I screwed it up and cost anybody points on that question, please do not hesitate to complain to the manager, and the manager will do something. Okay? Crap. There you go. Actually, I like to think of this as an educational thing. I'm making mistakes to see if you're paying attention. God, I feel like an idiot. Okay, so here's the deal. How can you have an identity, a foreclosed identity, can be negative or positive? You know, my wife's family wanted her to either be a teacher or a nurse. They come from the country. Really, what they wanted her to be was a stay-at-home mother. They wanted her to be a housewife. Uh, then if she said she wanted to go to school, they said, okay, you can go to school to be a nurse or a teacher. My wife's family was trying to foreclose her identity. Okay, well, thank you. So my wife's family wanted to foreclose her identity. Do any of you know a person who grew up and did something because they had to do it? My daddy was a police officer. His daddy was a police officer. We're all police officers. Or the kid who goes into the gang because he doesn't think he has any other opportunities. These are examples of what we would call foreclosed identities. Foreclosed identities. Okay. Now, what he said exactly, it happens a lot when the family owns a business, right? Now, here's the deal. He argued that what you're going to see really in the youngest kids, you're going to see the diffused identity. You're then going to see kids when you're in 14 and 15. You talk to them, you're going to find out that they're all in crisis, but none of them have chosen anything. And you're going to find that these kids, they describe themselves in ways that sound like identity moratorium. And then when you talk to the 17 and 18-year-old kids, most of the time he found that they had been through a sense of crisis and come to a commitment. So what he found is that when you survey people, you're going to find this pattern of diffusion, moratorium, identity achievement in healthy identities. But what you're going to find is that sometimes people have their identities chosen for them. They have foreclosed identities. And occasionally, in the more problematic personalities and those people who have difficulty in adult, you're going to find some of them still have diffused identities. They've just been afraid to take the next step. And so Marcia's model sort of explains how the process of healthy identity development happens. Now, going back to the last slide, you're going to have to reinvent yourself. It's forced closure, absolutely, is what it is. And it doesn't have to be forced by necessarily an overbearing daddy. It can be reinforced by a culture. It can be reinforced uh, by a relationship partner. It can be foreclosed by circumstances beyond your control. Poverty may make you feel like your identity is foreclosed. Your culture may tell you that you can only be a housewife or that you must work as a fisherman, whatever. Yeah, so identities can be foreclosed. And so, this, in a sense, even though you develop your identity, what you're going to have to do throughout your life is you're going to have to reinvent this identity. Moratorium achievement, moratorium achievement. And expect this as life comes at you. Now, if you have the foreclosed identity, maybe you may have a bigger day of reckoning one later in your life. Have you ever heard the term identity crisis? I'm having a midlife crisis. Basically, in as you move through life, you're now in your 30s. When it gets to intimacy versus isolation, you're going to have to incorporate another person into your sense of identity, complex, and you're going to have a little crisis there. And then you're going to wake up one day, 45, with kids and a mortgage and a family and Christmas dinner obligations, and you're going to have that second identity crisis. And we call that midlife crisis. Really, what you're doing is you're having to reintegrate your sense of self with your current situation. Exactly, exactly. And that's the thing I've mentioned a couple of different times, but I think the word catches people's attention so much that they don't hear me. He used the word crisis. Actually, all of the psychoanalysts like Freud and Erickson, they were a little sloppy with their language. So he would sometimes call it a psychosocial task and sometimes call it a crisis. Basically, it's a psychosocial task. I knew what I wanted to be in life when I grew up at 40. Yeah, right? So crisis is necessary. Crisis or psychosocial work is necessary. But I would argue to the degree that you choose your identity, right? That you are successful in choosing your identity, like we talked earlier, and you get that virtue of developing a good identity. And then when we get to the next stage, you choose your level of intimacy, you resolve that stage, then your crises become manageable. The person that has the midlife crisis that is really, really difficult to deal with is the person that maybe had trouble in stage 5 and stage 6 along the way. So at each stage of Erickson's model, how you resolve the stage sort of sets you up for either success or failure. Now, when we're developing a sense of identity, remember all of the things that we learned along the way are important. So, in resolving the first crisis, you develop a sense of hope, right? A sense of hope is necessary for developing a positive sense of identity. In your second year, autonomy versus shame and doubt, you developed willpower. If you think about it, willpower is an important component in building a healthy sense of identity, right? Then initiative versus guilt, and you develop the sense of purpose, a sense of purpose in life, right? And then in middle school, when it's industry versus inferiority, you learn a sense of competence. Think about this: hope, willpower, purpose, competence. These all sound like the fundamental building blocks of a healthy identity. If you're missing one of these building blocks, it becomes more difficult to develop that healthy identity. Then having a healthy identity or not building a healthy identity at 18 or 19 makes it more difficult for you to achieve intimacy or to achieve a sense of meaning later in life. So each of these stages builds upon itself. I, Exactly. When you get married, it's no longer about self where I have to incorporate. I'm no longer Chris. I'm Chris the married man. I'm the Roddenberry family. And then when you have kids, it's going to get even more complex. Or dogs, pets, dogs, cats, chickens, cows, whatever it is you take care of. And you find yourself with that brood of things. I wake up every day and there are people that count on me. That's a scary feeling. 16-year-old Chris didn't even have any concept about the fact that seven, eight, or nine people might rely on him for their survival. That's a scary thought. I'm glad now I'm dealing with it rather than at 16. Okay? Now, here's the deal. One of the things that I love about Wake Tech is it's such an international school. We get students from around the world. One of the things that I can't even begin to imagine is how difficult it must be to move to a place that is culturally very different from the place in which you are from. One of the things that I like about traveling around the world, one of the things that I liked about spending in Eastern Europe was I got a chance to know who Chris was again because I had to think about myself and how I related to this new culture that I found myself in. Now, European and American is similar in a lot of ways, but it's not completely similar, right? And so I had to renegotiate my sense of self. You know what I mean? I'm an anxious, pushy person over in their culture. They are definitely not about being in a hurry, and they don't like people who come off as anxious and pushy. And so I had to learn how to renegotiate uh, that aspect of myself in this new culture. So, if you've never gone anywhere, you may not have even thought about your culture identity. It was given to you. Your cultural identity was, in a sense, foreclosed upon you. For 50 years, my identity as a Southern white male was foreclosed upon me. But when you go to another culture, you then have to try to navigate how you relate to these two cultures, the one that you are from that forms a core sense of your identity, and the one in which you are thrown into. Now, the reason that we care about this is because there are some people that have trouble fitting in and have difficulty. Children who maybe are placed, who have to move to a different country when they're young, sometimes have this. Sometimes have this experience of having to navigate these two cultures. And we can look at the outcomes of these children and see if there are any strategies which are healthier or more productive than others. Remember, I suggested to you that developmental psychology is interested in helping people achieve a sense of well being over the course of their life. Doing well in school, not having a drug problem, making money, fitting in, and being happy in a new culture. That's one thing that we are interested in. And what you're going to see is research has suggested that people who are able to adapt sort of the bicultural orientation tend to have the best outcomes. So, this is where you can sort of find elements of the new culture that you can participate in, and then you can pull into your identity while retaining certain aspects of your old culture that make you feel good. And what you're going to see sometimes when I had international friends and I would go over to their house, it always seemed it was dinner time and holidays where they really emphasized their cultural roots and their old cultural roots. And then they would walk out the door every day and drive the American car and wear the American clothes and listen to the American uh, songs or watch American media. And you see that what they're trying to do is they're trying to have a sense of ethnic identity and also acculturate to this culture. And those are going to be your more successful uh, orientation. Now, this particular chart talks about Hispanic and Anglo orientations. I took this chart from a discussion of how Hispanics might be fitting into this culture, but you can replace Hispanic with any culture you want to. You can put Korean, You can put Laotian, Congolese. You can put whatever orientation you go in here. But what you're going to find is the best outcomes are when the person can find ways to accentuate and feel their home culture as well as participate in and be a part of the new culture. Now, why is this important? Well, some of you, if you come from another country and you plan on staying here and having children, uh, uh, you're going to have to, you're going to, I'm sure, want a way to accentuate the culture from which you come so that your children grow up with a sense of where they're from, as well as being American. However, some of you may be over here and you may have children and raise them here in the United States for 10 or 15 years and then decide to go back to Asia or Africa or South America or wherever you're from, and your children may have to learn how to accommodate to that new culture. I had a friend named Eddie whose family was from Bogota, Colombia. He'd been born there but moved here when he was 6 months of age and didn't know anything about the Colombian culture. And his dad moved him, his dad worked for the government and moved him to Panama as a 14-year-old kid. Can you imagine that? Right? So you grow up learning about this Colombian culture that's very distant, but you're an American. And he grew up as an American. He was American's apple pie. And then suddenly in your teenage years, he's forced to go back to South America and become acculturated in an entire new place that he looks Hispanic, he can speak Spanish, but he wasn't. And so he had to try and figure a way to sort of navigate these two processes. And uh, you as a parent have to learn how to help your child navigate these two cultures for the best outcomes. Now, let's talk a little bit about religiosity. It's one thing that does develop in adolescence. So your child, your child when you're 8 or 9, you go to church because your parents tell you to go to church, right? As you become a teenager and move into adulthood, you are going to decide whether or not you go to church or not, whether or not you are religious or go to the mosque or go to to wherever it is, whatever religion, you're going to decide your level of spiritual engagement. And it is an important part. There you go. There you go. But you know what? They're going to see what you do, and that is, in a sense, going to affect them. If you are vehemently against going to church, even though you may not tell them they can't go to church, they're going to see that attitude in you. On the other hand, maybe you go to church, but you don't tell them that they have to. They're still going to see that you do it and think about it as a life choice, right? And so, what you're going to see is that formal operational children can begin to think about things uh, like religious and spiritual concepts. And they may start asking those weird questions like, how can a good God let bad things happen? Some of them are going to start to understand the importance of mankind, humankind, and being part of a spiritual community. Some people may look at religion and their critical thinking skills may lead them not to believe it. Your child, in a sense, is going to become start forming their sense of religious identity uh, during this age. Now, I am not a particularly religious person. I was brought up Southern Baptist as a young kid, but pretty much floated away from it early in my teen years. And have not done much with it as an adult. However, having said that, I will tell you that being spiritual, having some sort of religious practice, some sort of religious belief, is associated with positive indicators of well-being and health. So spirituality and religiosity are positively related to well-being, self-esteem, conscientiousness, agreeableness, and openness, all really good personality traits. Spirituality is negatively correlated with problem behaviors. So whatever type of spirituality you do choose, or you encourage your child choose, just know that there are positive outcomes associated with being religious. Now, older people tend to be more religious, and your 8 to 10-year-old child has no choice in how religious their practice is going to be. So, what you're going to see is that, as a general rule, kids' religious behavior, since they're sort of losing their parents' habit, is going to drop during the teenage years. It's just sort of a normal thing that happens. Most kids are going to church because their more religious parents want them to, and then some are going to fade away as teenage years occur. And the biggest drop is going to be during the teenage years rather than 21, 22, 23. But we are going to come back to this refrain over the course of this semester. Spirituality in whatever, in organized religion, in whatever form you find it, is going to be associated with well-being and other positive indicators. Okay. This time, boy, we all joke about the teenage time as being this storm and strife kind of situation. And you will occasionally see on TV, in the media, portrayals of these horrible family conflicts, and they suggest as if all teenagers and all teenage life is this huge conflict and war between parents. And in fact, that is not the rule, that is the exception. Now, I'm sure maybe one of you out there may have had a conflictual relationship, but for the most part, usually the adolescent times just involve minor arguments between parents and children. And it's going to be about sort of relatively innocuous stuff. Maybe the state of a house, maybe the state of your body. Take a shower, cut that hair. I want to stay out late. No, you can't stay out that late. You know what? It's time for you to do homework. Put those video games away. This is going to be the kind of conflict that you see. Now, I grew up in a family with some serious conflict, and there were huge parties and alcohol and drugs and car crashes and running away from home. So I saw some real conflict in my older brothers and sisters. I didn't have that conflict with my parents, but there was some real conflict. But most of the time, you're going to find in the teenage years, while there is some conflict with your kids, it's mostly going to be about the limits as they're trying to negotiate their own freedom. They feel like grown-ups. Now that you're a 30-year-old, you know that they're not grown-ups, but your 14-year-old's going to know that they're grown up. And you're just going to have to sort of, and the most of the conflict's going to come from you checking those adult impulses that your kid has, right? And so, this conflict actually can be good because you and your child will learn how to negotiate conflict, how to come to resolutions. Your child needs to learn how to advocate for themselves in a positive way rather than throwing temper tantrums to get your way. How can they use convincing tactics? How can they be persuasive? How can they use charm? These are all skills that you're going to need as an adult when you move into the workplace. So, conflict in negotiation, conflict resolution can be a positive outcome from the conflict if you, as a parent, choose to use it that way. Try not to be the my way or the highway kind of parent. Even though you may have red lines and things that you need done, you can talk about points of negotiation. You can tell your kids when there are red lines, and you should negotiate those points that are negotiable and try to give your kid the sense of autonomy that they need. Allowing your child to break away and grow up during this period is an important part of growing up. Now, there's actually a book, as a side note, there's actually a book called iGen. Jen Twenge is a very famous social psychologist who is very interested in social media and how it affects our development. And she actually thinks that children aren't doing a good job separating from parents during their adolescence. She said, now, while this looks good on the outside, they're not smoking, they're not drinking, they're not having as much sex as kids were in the 70s and 80s. They're not doing things like getting jobs and getting licensed and learning how to live independent of their parents. And so what you're going to find is your kids, if you give them that ability to grow up and grow away from you, it can be a healthy thing. Remember, you're a manager. You are just monitoring to make sure that things are going well, but you are not scheduling and directing. That time is long gone. What you're doing is you're giving your kid a chance to make the right decision, right? So, yes, you are definitely going to monitor your children. I mentioned it on Tuesday. Sometimes, if your kid seems good, you can put it on autopilot and quit watching them. As soon as you quit watching your kid, they're going to start messing up. So, always being vigilant and being willing to talk and negotiate about the things you see is the key to having a successful parenting experience. Now, as a guy who's raised two adult sons with medium levels of success, neither one of my kids is going to cure polio or free another country, be a freedom fighter. But they're both relatively healthy young boys. Um, it is a difficult process, and there are going to be lots of situations where there is no manual, and you're just going to have to. Some of this stuff sounds kind of vague, and that's because each and every situation is completely different. You have to keep sort of your eyes on the prize here. We're looking for autonomy and positive personality skills. And how can I achieve that and teach my kid how to control their emotions? So you're still working on the big picture. And whatever decision in that specific situation that appears to get you closer to those positive adult goals is what you're looking for. But it's a weird time raising teenagers. I'm telling you, man, it is weird. Compared to early middle childhood, most teens prefer, oh my goodness, I'm running out of time. I am out of time. So I want you to read about friendship in the adolescent social scene and friendship in adolescence. And remember, we've talked about attachment and its later impact in life. There are several comments here about the positive effects of secure attachment style, how it relates to our adult functioning. And I do want you to say that some people say that attachment is not something that happens when you're two, but it's a continual process. And these people say that disruptions in your attachment as a teenager can be problematic as well. So parents getting divorced and your worry about which parent loves you is an attachment problem, and that can occur in at age 8 or 9. So there are some people who say attachment in infancy predicts adult outcomes, and it does. But there are other people who say that, you know what, attachment related events can happen later in life that are problematic as well. Please read those on your own. Good luck with this week's homework. If y'all have any questions for me, don't hesitate to send me a text or an email. Any typos that need fixing, I'm always happy to fix them. And you know what? I just want to say thank you because we had a huge crowd. 9 people were in class today. That's a great crowd. And I just want to thank you for your continued engagement in this class. Y'all have a great day, and I will see you next Tuesday at 10 a.m. Take care. Bye.